Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a frontline update for the 10th of January 2023. I will try, and this will probably please you all, try and go really quickly today because I have a live interview with the Critical Faculty channel. That's on my philosophy stuff in just over an hour. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to do everything, but here goes. Let's look at the Ukrainian figures for the losses for the Russians yesterday. This is, of course, with a bunch of caveats that we normally see. Accuracy, propaganda, Russians don't produce the same figures. 710 liquidated personnel, so that's fairly high again. Tanks for 7 APCs, 4 artillery systems, 4 drones. This is a big one. 1 warship or boat. It could be a small boat. It could be a warship. Apparently, details are going to come out about that later. 8 vehicles and fuel tanks. So fairly bad day for the troops in terms of personnel lost, but otherwise pretty average, I guess. General staff say it will provide more information on a Russian ship it hit after clarification. Very intriguing. So we don't really know much about that. There are a bunch of Russian ships now on patrol, both in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Azov Sea as we speak. I don't think the ones in the Azov and the Black Sea are cruise missile equipped, so I don't think we're getting ready for another saturation attack, but they are out and about. Russia on fire, spectacular scene, greets drivers in Kogalim. It's the second big fire in the autonomous Khanty-Mansi region in 24 hours. The fire is at the Nefte Avtomatika plants dealing with both oil and gas productions. Casualties not yet known. Another big fire. I've seen a whole load of sort of other fires in Russia, probably not related to any kind of partisan activity or anything dodgy, but there's so many fires in Russia. Their statistics for fires just must be terrible compared to Britain. Hardly see any fires in Britain at all, and yet Russia, they are 10 a penny. The US is considering sending Striker armored combat vehicles to Ukraine in an upcoming aid package to help Kyiv fend off an expected Russian spring offensive. There's some talk that the offensive is now going on, that the Bakhmut could be the spring offensive, or it could just be opportunism where they are suddenly throwing a whole bunch of people at Bakhmut because they found a weakness up in the Solidar area. I don't know. Who knows at the moment? This is interesting because the Striker is one of the only vehicles other than main battle tanks that the US hasn't really sent. So this is possibly good news. Package could be announced with or without Strikers late next week. And the Striker can come with a big gun on top that looks rather like the AMX-10RC that we saw that France had sent. I don't know whether it is a stabilized gun. For the French vehicle, you can't fire it on the move. You have to stop and fire, so it's not stabilized. So there is a difference there. I don't know if that's the case with the Striker, but that is really good news if they do decide to send Striker. Sweden has pledged to provide Ukraine with Archer artillery systems. Pledged on January 9th that Ukraine would receive Archer SPG self-propelled artillery systems. These are wheeled howitzers that you can, if I can actually do the right thing there, that looks like that, kind of reminiscent of the Caesar, being produced since I think 2011 onwards. So that's good news for so in service from 2011 onwards, designed from the mid 90s on. That'll be good news for the Ukrainians if they do get there. But obviously these things, it's not like they turn up the next day and they're already trained. The Ukrainians are already trained on them. So it takes a long time for these things to get over there and be filtered through training and into service. But good news nonetheless. Okay, just a point on Solidar. Andrew Perpetua says almost all the information about Solidar is propaganda. Do not read things and accept them as facts. Practically everything you will see about Solidar is propaganda, whether it is pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian or positive or negative. I suggest not taking any of it seriously. Defmon says, I agree. Of course, I don't. Yeah, the point is correct that you have. Well, the point is you have to be really careful whether you can accept nothing as delivering some kind of information that's useful. I don't know. I would contest. General Lapin. So you might remember I reported on him treating some Russian conscripted mobilized troops pretty terribly up in the Svatove area, and he was pretty much got rid of in that area fairly recently. Anyway, he's been promoted. So I think this indicates that Russia just don't have a depth of command. They've got rid of so many command people in high levels of command and shuffled them around because they're not doing well enough. But then, of course, if you've got no one to replace them with, if you don't have a decent depth of um, quality commanders, then you know what do you do but get the people you got rid of back to do a job? General Lapin, dismissed in disgrace, was appointed chief of the Russian ground forces. Right Russian media. Previously, Lapin led the center group. Due to failures at the front, he was severely criticized by the head of Chechnya, Kadyrov, and Wagner boss Prigozhin, and resigned. Well, he's now back, and one wonders how that's going to go down with the military bloggers. I don't think very well. And last thing to say is that Russian Urals oil is sold at $37.8 a barrel, which is more than half the world price of Brent, 78.6, and well below the ceiling of $60 introduced by the G7 countries, reports Bloomberg. And in fact, it tracks pretty much where the cap was put on. I don't know whether that signifies that the cap has been successful in driving down the price of Russian Urals, but Russia had budgeted, as I understand it, so their national budget is based on at least $60 a barrel for their oil. And if they're getting, I don't know, probably 60% of that price, of that income, then of course their budget is going to have a massive hole, and that's going to produce economic woes for them. Anyway, let's go on to the front lines. Okay, let's go to our first port of call, which is, as ever, the Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna front line in the northeast of Ukraine. As we come and look at that, not a lot of news for the Dvorichna, Tavolzhanka area up the very north, just northeast of Kupiansk. But as we come down, we hear that rotations are happening along this line, as according to the Russians, for the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians are rotating their forces. That Stelomakivka, there were repelled attacks around Stelomakivka. Reports that possibly evidence that the Ukrainians do control Kupiansk and Kolomychika. So you have that. Rebar says rotation Ryhorodka direction has seen reinforcements. So Ryorodka is down here, so reinforcements piling into there, or not necessarily piling in, but there are reinforcements. The ISW says a Russian military blogger warned on January the 9th that Ukrainian forces are preparing for a renewed offensive on the Liman sector west of Kreminna and are concentrating equipment near Terny. Geolocated combat footage shows a duel between Russian and Ukrainian tanks southwest of Kreminna near Dubrova, indicating that Ukrainian troops likely have made gains in the forest east area west of Kreminna. Russian sources continue to discuss Ukrainian reconnaissance activities in this area southwest of Kreminna, as you would expect, particularly in a forested area. So there is attacks around Makivka and the usual sort of places, Chervonopopivka, Ploshchanka. Here to sort of rebar saying in the Liman sector, the enemy is preparing for an offensive, as we said, near Terny. At least 15 vehicles are concentrated at Tursky, and M777 battery has been set up. Assault units have been brought near Liman and supplies have been delivered. So there could be, so let's just talk about all of that, all in one, really. Ploshchanka, there's been geolocated footage of, I don't know whether the tank itself, the Russian tank, was west of Ploshchanka, but the Ukrainians were being fired on west of Ploshchanka. The point being that Ukrainians definitely, I would say, definitely don't control Ploshchanka, but there is fighting to the west of there. Repelled attacks in Chervonopopivka. I don't know 100% who really controls Chervonopopivka or whether it is just a grey zone at the moment. And the Terny area, this is where there's a build-up, apparently, according to Rebar, of Ukrainian troops and assets, such that they've got artillery batteries and vehicle build-up. So could this be the site of a large spring counteroffensive? Will there be several counteroffensives? Who knows? It seems that Ukrainians, again, the claims are, the stuff going around Dubrova. Do they control Dubrova? Quite possibly. Do they control Kuzmina? Who knows? But the idea that they are making slow gains in that area, as according to some Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians repulsed an attack around Stelomakivka, as per normal, according to the Center for Defense Studies. They also reported that the Ukrainians reached the distant approaches of to Zhmivka and control Konomichika and Kupiansk. That's what I said, although Defmon seems somewhat doubtful of CDS reports. Kreminna, Ukraine's repulsed an attack around Chervona-Popivka, and he believes that they are advancing slowly in a forest south of Kreminna. And there you go. There are also reports that the Ukrainian are hitting bridges in Kreminna the last few days, but no confirmation. So that would be interesting because that would signify that they are trying to soften up Kreminna potentially for an oncoming attack. That could be the spring counteroffensive we are hearing about, or one of them. Who knows? Anyway, let's move further south to our good friend Solidar, or unfortunately our very beleaguered friend Solidar. Okay, let's try and make some sense of what's going on in Bakhmut. Don't have too much information about north of there, Boristova, Spirina, Bilorivka, but obviously there's an awful lot of information coming out of Bakhmut and Solidar. We need to try and work out exactly what is right and what isn't. Just the fog of war will make this somewhat educated guesses. Let's go and look at some basic claims. Situation in the settlement is extremely difficult. That's Solidar. A Russian military blogger noted that Ukrainian troops maintain control of the Artyomsol enterprise and surrounding high-rise building in northern Solidar. This is interesting because it is thought that that is under Russian control. So this is what they're talking about, I believe. But actually, I would say, well, most sources have that under Russian control. The salt mine is over here. Sometimes there's a confusion between salt mine and this more touristy kind of area on the railway lines here. I don't know. There are conflicting claims about that set of buildings. Russian sources additionally claim that Russian forces took control of Bakhmutska, yes, Krasnohora, and Paraskovivka, and that battles are ongoing in Burkovka. Although ISW has not observed visual confirmation of these Russian claims. And Ukrainian General Staff have noted that they've repelled attacks all around there. This is the map that's been extended by a war mapper that shows advances of the Russians in Solidar and smaller advances elsewhere in Bakhmut. These light pink areas are the advances from yesterday towards Krasnohora. So the Russians claim to control Pidorodne, claim to control Krasnohora, and even Paraskovivka, as you've just seen, and possibly Blahoddatny. Oh goodness, words! It's too early. And there are the movements on the eastern side here. Warmapper doesn't have the Russians on this road down there. I do, but that's their general interpretation of events. Defmon, repulse attacks around Solidar, Krasnohora, Pidorodne, Bakhmut, and Klishchivka. Situation Solidar is unclear, and there are a lot of rumors. I believe it's stable but difficult. They're still fighting Opitny, but not reported. Rebar says Wagner assault units are attacking the central part and northern outskirts of Solidar. There's fighting over the town government buildings where enemy troops are holed up. I told you about that yesterday. These government buildings are around here. That's your government buildings there. So right in the center of that northern part of the town. Let's go back to what Rebar was saying. The defense of Solidar is held by a motley collection of AFU units who are taking heavy losses and have no communication. Word is spreading among Ukrainian formations of a coming withdrawal from the town due to impossibility of supporting the garrison. There might be elements of that. It's true. There have been rumors about withdrawal, but then the Ukrainians say no. But I know that the supply route into Solidar, I don't know, but I think it has been cut. Northeast of Bakhmut, Russian units attacked and used the elevation advantage to break the defensive line, coming from Pidorodny and Bakhmutsky, reaching Krasnohora and Praskoviivka. So what this is basically saying is that attacks are coming from the north, the east, and the south. Things are difficult here, and that apparently they're also attacking towards all these places. Unsure. We shall see. I haven't changed my lines particularly. South of Solidar, Rebar continues. Currently, adjacent outposts are being cleared near the two villages. Some Ukrainian formations voluntarily gave up their positions. There's no firm control over Krasnohora or Paraskovivka yet. Given Ukrainian losses, even reinforcements will not allow them to maintain this defensive line. I have been wondering whether the reinforcements were a little slow coming to Solidar. And I know you think like straight away reinforcements can get there straight away, like click your fingers and they're there. But actually, it takes time, even if they're based in Chasiv Yar, like to actually gather them, give them intel, give them orders and objectives, make sure they know what they're doing, collect all their equipment, everything they're going to need for however long they need to be there, and then transport them over to here and then get them into position. That could take that, that's a day, arguably. So the idea that things got tough in Solidar and then maybe a day and a half, 2 days later that you're starting to see meaningful reinforcements might seem surprising, but that's the nature of the beast, arguably. Um, so this is a map from Syriac Maps, so they are pro-Russian, but they show broadly actually what I show, which is Russian control coming up from the central area of Solidar and also coming down from the north, and it sees salt mines and this northern area of the town that is still under Ukrainian control, but it is tough. Kenneth Runtz, claims of Kenneth Gregg, wrote this translation, but I don't think this guy is in Solidar. So I have some less good news from Bakhmut. Over the last 24 hours, the Russians have advanced into the first urban blocks of the eastern Bakhmut. We'll come to that. It means that we no longer have a buffer zone, but now are active in hand-to-hand combat. Since we are defending, we have the advantage in an urban environment. The Russians will be defeated after a few blocks. They do not have enough manpower. Solidar is holding, and we have open maintenance route northwest of the city. I disagree with that, or that is out of date now. There are now reports that Russian forces have broken through the defensive lines of the 17th Brigade and 60th Combat Detachment to the north of Bakhmut, with them advancing to the towns of Krasnohora and Paraskovievka. That's OSINT Defender, and that's in line with what the Russians are claiming. No report says the situation is hard. The Ukrainians are mostly fighting backwards. Russian forces attacking mainly from the north and northeast, trying to surround the city. In the southwest, no news. Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that Russia has fire control over parts of the supply route to Solidar. So the supply route coming from north is going to be down here, and also up from the south. I mean, this road will then supply into here. So whether the fire control is over this main road and possibly even here, or these roads coming in, and these roads coming, the smaller roads coming in here, I don't know, but it appears to be really difficult to get supply into Solidar in a safe manner. So there is lots of talk about supply being cut. War Monitor says Solidar situation. Russian forces have reportedly gained fire control of the main supply route into Solidar. Russian forces made some gains today in the town. Ukrainian units from 3 different brigades continue to fight house to house in the town. The situation has deteriorated. So, bad news from War Monitor there, or, not on the good side of the news, one can say. The Russians do have, I think, various units themselves fighting. So it's not just Wagner mercenaries, or at least in the Bakhmut area in general, there appears to be more than just Wagner going on. And that's because the Russian forces understand, one thinks that they are onto a winner around here and Bakhmut could finally fall. So they're piling in troops. That would be my understanding. So Tim White says that also the Ukrainians have lost one of the most senior officers in the fight to hold Solidar, Colonel Yuri Yurchik, head of the Special Forces Unit of State Border Guard Service. So the State Border Guards are doing quite a lot of work around Solidar. Died of severe shrapnel wounds. He's been personally helping evacuate seriously wounded colleagues. That's how he died. Heavy fighting is still ongoing in Solidar this morning, says OSINT Defender later, as Ukrainian defenders are continuing to hold out primarily at the salt mines against Russian or Wagner forces. So that's the indication that both are operational, and have advanced deep into the city and are now attacking the defenders from the north, south, and east. Yeah, kind of what we're saying. And here is a journalist, I think, embedded in the Solidar area. So the Russians near Solidar have been going on frontal attacks for the 9th day and are storming the city in small groups of infantry, and land near Solidar is littered with the corpses of Russians, most of whom are prisoners and Wagner mercenaries. So he's saying that, yeah, it's pretty tough, but there are a lot of Russian casualties, as you can imagine. Russia are striking. So here's somewhere in the area, the industrial zone between Solidar and Bakhmut, after which a fire started and a column of smoke rose. So undoubtedly, artillery is doing its things for the Russian as well, as they are kind of smelling blood, if you like, possibly almost literally. And here's some visual footage to go alongside what's going on in Solidar. These are the soldiers of 46th Air Mobile Brigade, supported by a Wolfhound MRAP. So this is a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle that the British have provided. It gives you, and this is engaging troops near the salt mine. So the salt mine is probably this salt mine, so it's around about here. Firing going on in this, so I'll get you to the place that's of slightly more interest. So there's gives you a sense of the soundscape, suppressing fire, and this guy, I don't know whether he's just sort of comms guy, he's got radio there, but he seems to be just sitting on his mobile phone doing selfies. But obviously, you know, I jest not, because this is all serious stuff. Here's your MRAP. That's a Wolfhound MRAP that's got some kind of heavy machine gun on top, or some kind of auto cannon. As you can see, the salt mine there. So laying out a lot of possibly suppressing fire there. I'd love to geolocate that properly and the direction and exactly where that is, but I just don't have time today, unfortunately. But you know, whether that's a salt mine there and the vehicle is here, firing in that kind of direction, I don't know. I don't know whether that is the one with the big sort of pylon-looking things. Whether that's one of them, I don't know. But that could be the salt mine, but it could be somewhere else. It could be that actually it's over here, and that vehicle is firing from around here, because you've got lots more of those. Sort of, that's the color. Yeah, it definitely looks like that is around there, actually, because that's one of those pylons. That's a color pylon. So it could be that that is some kind of evidence that the Ukrainians are active around Artyom assaults. Touristical area, as it calls it here. But then, of course, it's what the timestamp is on that video. I mean, if that's 24 hours old now, then that might be already out of date. So as we come down, so that's really, well, I say that's what's happening there. Confusion. Who knows exactly? There is this idea that the Russians have the high ground. They're still claiming that they've got this high ground here. And if they have that high ground here, you can imagine that, yeah, there is fire control. They'll have mortars probably active, and getting supplies into Solidar is difficult. Solidar is difficult. Pidorodny is difficult. Krasnohora is probably difficult, but the actual details of how much ground the Russians have here is kind of a bit confused and unknown. So I've kept my maps as they were yesterday. We shall see. I'm sure there'll be lots of news coming out, whether it's true or not today, who knows. And the Russians are still sort of putting pressure on the eastern suburbs, but as Kenneth Gregg said they're fighting house to house, street fighting, and the advantage will be for the defenders. But there is no buffer zone. There's no buffer zone to Bakhmut at the moment. It seems like, you know, apart from perhaps a little bit to the north where they're still trying to hold out in Pidorodny, you know, everywhere to the east and the south does seem to be under the control of the Russians, and they are putting increased pressure on. So yeah, Rebar says, just to continue saying, does it say anything about? No, I think it goes south and southwest of Bakhmut. Wagner assault units are attacking the Ukrainian outposts in Klishchivka and Opitny. Both settlements are under full Russian fire control. Ukrainian supply is highly restricted. So that's to say that coming down south here, Opitny, what's left of it of Ukrainian control, they say, is under Russian fire control. They are putting pressure there. That line might not be accurate. It might move further forward. Not 100% sure. And the same with Klishchivka. Not exactly sure the lines in Klishchivka, but they are putting pressure on Klishchivka and claim that it is under fire control. There's a lot of heavy entrenchments behind Klishchivka, so it won't be easy for them to take that settlement. However, I don't know what the ground is like here. I know that this is on higher ground and there's lots of trenches built in there and revetments and things, but don't know about this area there towards Ivanivska. Kurdimivka repelled attacks in Ozyanivka, apparently so as well. Yes, let's have a little look to see finally what ISW say about this area. So the ISW reports Russian mill bloggers claimed, as I've said, on January 9th that Russian troops captured Opitny, and geolocated footage of Ukrainian drones striking Russian positions confirms that Russian troops have made marginal advances in this area. Russian sources continue to discuss urban combat on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut and South Bakhmut. Pretty much confirming what I was saying. The problem is, and I said this yesterday, I'm not 100% sure where Opitny starts and where it ends, as far as it comes into southern Bakhmut. So when they say they control Opitny, do they mean up to there? Do they mean up to here? I'm not 100% sure. There you go. As we come further down south, there are claims, attacks, repelled attacks, Zalizhny, Krasnohorivka, as they try and come north of Avdiivka here, Kamyanka. According to Syriac maps, just north of Kamyanka, I think the Russians now control part of this road. Here, I mean, it's fairly insignificant whole scheme of things. You'd imagine they've got fire control over it anyway, but I think there's some movements around here, a bit of territory taken by the Russians. When there's not a lot happening around here, as in I don't report of territory gained and I say it's quiet, actually that can still indicate very heavy fighting, but things just aren't moving much at all. And that goes for, all around here, Pervomaisky, Vodyanye, even Krasnohorivka and Marinka, this other Krasnohorivka and Marinka down here, same to be said largely about this area, and I think fighting in Novomykhailivka. There are Russian claims again that the Ukrainians are amassing forces in Vuhledar or in this area. That could be anywhere around here, not sure, but they are claiming that the Ukrainians are amassing forces for a potential counterattack. It could be quite a clever place to do a counterattack around Vuhledar, because you can, rather than always talk about Tokmak, don't I? And how if the Ukrainians struck down here, they cut off supply to the west and to Crimea, because this cuts off the railway and a load of roads. But actually, if you attack from Vuhledar really very close and took out this kind of area here, you would do exactly the same thing. So if you go to the War Mapper map and look at the situation here, actually that railway lane. So I talk about Tokmak, take out the railway line there, job done. Yeah, take out Tokmak, easy. Not easy, but you know what I mean, like conceptually. So, well, actually, if you attack from Vuhledar, you could look how close the railway line is there. So you could get control over that railway line with a much smaller advance and do effectively the same thing. Okay, there is a lot of credibility, I guess, in the Russian claims that the Ukrainians could be amassing forces here, because I think, Volnovakha, they've been softening this area out. We know there've been a bunch of hits on Volnovakha and surrounding areas, so it could be that Ukrainians have softened up this area for an attack that might look something like that, and that could be the precursor for attack towards Mariupol. Who knows? Who what's the option there, or is it both? Anyway, I'm going to leave it almost there. I've just got one extra thing to say about some activity in Ochakiv. So let me just bring up this a bit of video footage of quite a big explosion. Big explosion occurred in Ochakiv, Mykolaiv Oblast. Earlier today, it's confirmed that Russia hit the area with MRLS rockets. Mykolaiv Governor Vitaly Kim confirmed there are 8 wounded right now. That's a pretty big explosion. They've hit something. Ochakiv is, just to let you know, or I'll go to my map here. So if we come down Kherson, past there, and opposite the Kimburn Peninsula, opposite the Kimburn Spit is Ochakiv. And I think there's probably around 3 different bases that are like Marines training bases. In fact, one of them, I think, might be right on the coastal edge there, and that could be what's been hit. I need to look more closely into that, but I'm fairly sure they've got sort of training bases around certain areas, and they have been targeted before. Ochakiv is often hit because this is your launch pad for attacks towards or onto the Kimburn Peninsula. Anyway, that's the end of the video today. It was rushed. I used fewer sources. I do apologize for that. I have a live interview. Hopefully it was still useful. There's just an awful lot of information coming out of Soledar, and sometimes a paradox of choice. You've got so much information that you don't know where to start. You know, if I go and buy this paradox of choice, if I go and buy a pair of jeans and I've got to pick from 60 pairs of jeans, I end up going and not being able to pick any. If you give me 3 pairs of jeans, I can make a much easier choice. Right, that one's the one for me. So sometimes when you have so much information that it's flooded, it's confusing and more difficult to pick out what you think is definitely going on. So there's that element going on, but also just time constraints. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll try and get out an extra video later. Toodle pips.